Welcome back, Earth Explorers. My co-host tonight, Suzanne Ross. She is organizing the Beyond the Matrix Expo, the Ascension Expo. We're calling it amazing names every single day, but it's Beyond the Matrix, March 19th and 20th. If you want to get to it, it's easy, or you're already on X Squared Radio, just go to the Events tab on the left-hand side, Events. Click on that. You'll see it right there on the top. Click the Register button, and guess what? 2 for 1 until March 1st. So if you put in the code Equinox241, Equinox241, you can now register 2 people for the price of 1 until March 1st. That's not very long. You better get on it. My guest tonight is Geraldine Orozco. She is, well, to say multidimensional would be a understatement. We're talking about science, but we're also talking about the spiritual involvement in the science of molecular biology of the human body, otherwise known as DNA. Now, you had made a comment in when you first started that human DNA is the envy of the universe. You know, I always have this statement that I make. Simplicity is the crown of genius, complexity the cloak of mediocrity. When I think about elegance in mathematics and science, I don't think about something that's giant and complex and almost incomprehensible. I think of something very simple and very perfect. Like if you look at amino acids, you think, well, gee, 6 amino acids, how complex can it be? But if you do the permutations and the combinations, it's unbelievable. It is so elegant. And yet you look at every living thing on this planet, every plant, every bacteria, even viruses, every animal on this planet has our DNA in it. Or if you look at it another way, we have their DNA in us. But the point is, it doesn't exist everywhere. It only exists here. So why do the star races envy or hold up such great respect for human DNA?
That's a great question. And I it's not that they envy. No, I don't believe I use that word. What I would say is that human DNA or DNA in general, not just our DNA, I'm talking about all DNA, is the currency of this matrix multiverse, in other words. And what I mean by that is that since the seeding of life on this planet and beyond, it's almost as if we are evolving. And as you mentioned a minute ago, that, you know, we are the DNA, and other aspects, even plants, are holding our DNA within them. We are mirroring, we are a species that is almost as if you can call it a cocktail of DNA. And I believe that we have evolved through many, I don't know if you want to call it timelines or cycles of life, and through those projections of life that we have taken on, each one of those life cycles that we have lived through is, imprinting within our DNA the information and the experience that we are receiving through those cycles. And I believe that is extended to life forms in all life forms in the matrix multiverse. So I feel that DNA is the currency. And the reason why is because I consider DNA almost as if you can call it the most valuable storage system that there is in this, in this reality, if you want to call it. The reason why is because it has the ability to store massive amounts of information. As a matter of fact, here in Stanford University in the San Francisco Bay Area, they are studying how to replicate and how to mimic the storage ability that DNA has. And that's really, really interesting, because it has an ability of storing massive amounts of information that even ourselves have a difficult time with our technology to, understand and to read what its complexity. So,
Well, that's true. I mean,
DNA, which we hold here.
my brother worked on the Human Genome
Yeah.
Program for the last 10 years of his career at Johns Hopkins. He was the chairman of physiology there.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's the first one to admit that at first they thought the human genome was going to be very large, very complex, but it turned out to be smaller than the ape, almost half. And that really threw them for a loop. It's where they resolved that these genes that we have a choice of proteins that they can express. But they also realized that of all the DNA that they've studied, only a small part of it is actually expressed as the human body. There's a lot of the DNA that they have played with, deleting and splicing and altering in some way to disable it. They can't figure out what it does. There's a lot of DNA that's not activated in our bodies.
That's right. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. And it's wonderful to have, the reference of your brother working on that project. Very valuable information that helps us understand how, this information, has possibly been manipulated over time. And so, but at the same time, I think our understanding of the structure of how we are able to have access to the information that it stores is also limited. We are living in this three-dimensional reality, this physical world, where we have a certain set of everything. We have a certain physics, we have an understanding of our biology, and of course, the origin of that understanding goes into science and history. But at the same time, we are multifaceted beings. We are multidimensional. There's many aspects to us. And so what I'm here to suggest is that in reality, our ability to read the information that we have there is also limited. And from the other side of it, our ability to see the remainder of that information is also limited. And whatever is being presented from the DNA is also being read from a limited perspective, from our human perspective. There is far more information that we hold. And it's not to say that it immediately will be, legible here on this dimension. I think that this information is accessible through other dimensions of our human body as well. And that's what makes us such incredibly complex and beings. And it's very important that we learn why and how to utilize this body of ours, how to understand how to decipher that information for ourselves.
That's very fascinating to me. I'm going to make a quick analogy. In physics, we look at the universe and we say there are basically two particles in the third dimension. We have protons and we have electrons. I mean, neutrons are just a combination of the two. We just add an electron to a proton, you get a neutron. But of those two particles, it makes up all the three-dimensional matter that we see, every gas particle, every star, every planet, every rock, every thing that we that is in the third dimension. That being said, we do have instrumentation that is picking up particles entering our dimension from another dimension. I don't mean non-scientific. I mean, these are government-run labs like the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory has detected particles popping into our dimension from another dimension. Now, this is very profound because this picks up on exactly what Geraldine is saying. We may have DNA on this planet that makes up our bodies, makes up living things on this planet. The DNA itself is multidimensional. It is actually connected and maybe even genetically expressed in another dimension. Am I right about that?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And so the other interesting thing about this, Brooks, is that from this information that is expressed here in this timeline, I mean, what I'm kind of sharing and showing is that our multidimensionality is not just limited to how the information is expressed genetically, but our bodies as an organism, as an entire organism, has the ability of moving in and out of these multiple dimensions. And so because of that complexity, of how our human body is structured, even our experiences are linked to other dimensional planes simultaneously in the present moment. And so what that means is that as we are experiencing our daily life, like me and you here on this radio show and all these listeners here in the present moment, we have several processes going on in the back end of our mind. But at the same time, all of those processes are triggers that are moving on multiple dimensions. And some of them, depending on your intention and the intensity of your focus on them, are in a sense, creating and linking ourselves to these multiple dimensions. And so what that means is that our DNA and our information is not only being imprinted from what we're experiencing in this current dimensional timeline, but also things that are occurring on multiple planes, multiple levels. So the information, and the reason why I want to point that out is because we talk about past lives, and as a regressionist myself, I work with people in regression to access some of their unlocked memories from this current lifetime and other lifetimes. And what I have noticed in my work is that we seem to be cycling through, for example, patterns of behavior, patterns of experiences. And these patterns of experiences run through family lineages that can go back, multiple generations. I mean, up to 22, 30, 40 generations within a family. And the interesting part about that is that what we have learned about the biology of pain and suffering and trauma is that all of this is also imprinted within our DNA. So we are literally cycling through patterns of this trauma and pain and suffering for centuries down our lineage. So it really, really makes us question, how have we come to be who we are here in this present moment? And I believe that it's accumulation of so much massive amounts of information that we are just becoming aware of. But it's important that we understand where that information comes from. A lot of that comes down from your ancestral lineage that you are cycling through. But at the same time, we are moving on multiple planes. And when we are healing, when we are in the process of healing, we are accessing that information, the information that we're coming down through our lineage, and that allows us to understand what is this, what makes up this organism of you and me. So DNA plays a very important role in that it is able to store all of these imprints of information, and we see that. Because genetically, for example, illnesses that are passed down are also passed down, whether they're jumping generations, depending on what illness they are. But we understand that, the origin of illness, there tends to be a psychosomatic, initiation for them. And there's a certain amount of, imprint and effect on the human body based on our environment. We know that because, as you mentioned earlier, Bruce Lipton's incredible work on epigenetics, that was tremendous in my early research as well, to help us understand better how we are processing emotions and how that information is being printed on the DNA level. So what makes DNA such a valuable currency is the fact that it can hold all of this imprinted information. But at the same time, the question is, if that is the case, why do we live in the kind of reality that we live in today? What makes our world the way that it is? I mean, when I look around, we see a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of illness. And you talked earlier about the pharmaceutical industry creating a tremendous, it's one of the largest, of course, in growth producing, industries that we have in the world. And among many other things in our reality, from our educational system to politics to our, agriculture, everything is in a certain way directed. And what I've seen is that a lot of these systems are quite managed or controlled on some level, on the highest level, with a certain purpose. And it seems to me that as humans here on the planet, we are coming into this certain state of a constant survival mode all the time. A lot of illness, a lot of sick. We're not being able to pull out of that, constant survival mode. So the question lies, who is running the show? Are we constantly coming into these patterns of behavior because of our ancestral lineage, or is our system providing us this kind of an environment? So all of that is important questions that help us understand the information that is being imprinted in our DNA. And the next question is, why? Why is that information being put into the DNA, and how does that make the human valuable?
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to this sins of the fathers kind of mentality. My ancestors had heart disease, so I'm going to have heart disease, or my ancestors had diabetes, so I'm going to have diabetes. That could be, but you also have an ability to input on that and make changes. For instance, if you have a family that's prone to heart disease, you can consciously change the way you exercise and the way you eat, and you can choose not to express that heart disease, and you can live a long, normal, happy life. So that's just a broad example, but there are other examples. Now, the one that we seem to be paying a lot of attention to in the, quote, wellness industry today is the cycles of failure that people seem to be experiencing in relationships, in jobs, in, being able to manifest wealth and bounty for themselves. They seem locked into, tiny little spirals of failure over and over and over again. They reflect this on themselves over and over again, and they really don't know how to break out of it. Even if they've taken courses in it and read books in it, watched videos or webinars about it, they still don't know how to break out of this cycle. And I think it's because, at least based on my experience with others and success that I've had in helping people through this, that this comes from past life experiences. It comes from past life scripts that we've written for ourselves. And when we become, adults in this life, when we reach the time when we go out on our own and start working on our own, here we go, repeating the same patterns that we had of failure in the past life. How do people break this cycle and choose to be successful and choose to have bounty in their lives?
So in 2013, I had a very impactful contact experience. And, I was literally taken out of my bedroom window into a ship where I was introduced to my hybrid children. And that caused such a tremendous paradigm change for me that I began to question absolutely everything. But even more so, what changed for me and what was my proof from that experience was that the very next day I had the ability of seeing the multidimensional body, that I could see cords, I could see what we understand as attachments, cords, concentration of information in the physical body. And of course, previous to that, I spent many years more as a hobby, or I thought it was a hobby because I understand everything is happening for a reason now. But, I became certified in pranic energy healing, quantum energy healing, and shamanic energy training, because I was interested in those things. But I had no idea that they would complement what I'm doing now. But when I could see everything that I had been taught from that education now in the body, when I could understand how things move and flow, then the picture was broadened for me, and I understood how this illness is stored and moves through the body. And it took an adjustment, of course. It took 5 years for me to actually really integrate that information, Brooks. But the reason why I'm sharing this story with you, because how it's played a role in my understanding of illness and how it's affecting the body on such a deep level, took me in a wild ride of research of understanding how exactly, as we were speaking previously, how DNA is recording this information. And what I realized is that because the body is so complex, it is moving literally in and out of these multiple dimensions in this present moment. And at the same time, all of those experiences are imprints that are storing within the DNA. And that means everything, our emotions, our fears, our anxieties, our intentions, our dreams, all of those things that we're moving in and out of emotionally are vibrational imprints that are being placed into our body. And then through our nervous system, of course, as you know, the body is absorbing all this information like a sponge, and it comes into the nervous system, going into, the endocrine system of the body, and from there affecting our organs. And this complexity of the human body is such a beautiful, complex structure that allows us to filter experiences through these filtration systems that we know commonly as the chakra system. But each one of those are holding the information on another dimension per se, based on its frequency, in alignment with that particular information, and it is compartmentalized within the 7 main chakras of the body. And so when this information then goes through those filters, if the person is not aware of how to fully process what they are filtering, it becomes stored within the body. And over time, that stored energy, which is information, is then manifesting in the physical body. It then moves. It's almost as if that information is transforming through the way of how that frequency is changing. And when that frequency changes, it then has the ability to change. Of course, frequency has different ranges of frequency, but it also has the ability of changing based on the information that is being fed through. So if this changes from a higher frequency to a lower frequency, you asked me at the beginning of this interview, how we see that spectrum. And so depending on that frequency, it can become more of a solid or a slower wavelength or a faster wavelength. Okay. And so each one of those different frequencies is also basically defining how that information is stored within the physical body. And from that perspective, the body ends up becoming ill because it can no longer move the energy with the natural chi, what we call life force, which should be running through the body quite freely and energetically in a healthy way. When we have these stagnant situations of energy, it is holding on to that information, not allowing it to flow. And so the body comes out of balance. It comes out of balance, it becomes ill, it becomes sick. So the other part of this has to do with our ancestral trauma. And of course, because of our environment and because of our perceptions and the programs that we have either inherited through our lineage or are experiencing through our, growing up and all of our experiences in our daily life, are also setting a tone for how we will process information. So it's really, really important, because now our filtration system is now set to that program that we have. So all of this is important in understanding when it comes to healing, because when we talk about deprogramming, and so what I do is called DNA deprogramming, and I call it DNA deprogramming because we are deprogramming all of these programs from literally the vibrational frequency of the body. We are accessing those main nodules of information that are causing a stagnation of energy in the body and dissolving them. Now, energy, as we know, it never disappears, it only reallocates. So
Right.
that
Well,
is also
we're going to
the
take a
same
quick
in the
break.
human body.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we're going to take a quick break.
Yeah.
This is fascinating stuff. I've
Yeah,
got
sure.
a whole page of notes here. We're going to cover some of this cool stuff as soon as we get back from the break. It'll take about 3 minutes. You YouTubers, hang on, because I have to turn off and then turn back on so YouTube doesn't gig me for the bumper music. But we'll be right back after this. Don't go away. More X Squared Radio coming at you right